Oh, is my microphone up? My microphone wasn't working. I pressed the button. Ding, I'm back now. Last week, Mag, JD, and myself I will start again. This is terrible, isn't it? I'm so professional. I'm unprofessional. Is the sound back on? Right, let's get the sound back on. Right, let's start again. So last week, Mag, JD from History Underground, and myself visited Guernsey and Alderney courtesy of their respective tourist departments. I met with lots of people, and over the summer, I'll be hosting plenty of live shows to discuss the history there. We met museum curators, we met happy volunteers at associations and gun batteries, we met tour guides, restaurateurs, hoteliers, and the experience was absolutely fantastic. So I am going to do a kind of an impromptu reaction, really, to what we discovered there. There'll be lots more serious content when I have the serious historians coming on and explaining what they did. But I'm going to give you my 5 kind of top impressions of what we experienced there on the island. So without further ado, by the way, I haven't got any of the video footage sorted out yet. I just have been so busy since I got back. There's so many things going on. You can't believe how many things I was up to today. But I've got a PowerPoint ready with some photos there. So this is what I have put together. So 5 observations about the trip there. So the first thing is well, there's JD, myself, and Mag there. That's in San Malo before we took the ferry. The ferry we took is the one in the back corner at the left. I think it was about the last trip ever by Condor ferries, and Condor ferries have now been taken out by Brittany ferries, the bigger ferry on the right. So we went on Condor, came back on Brittany ferries, and there's information in the links below about visit Alderney, visit Guernsey, the restaurants, the pubs, everything else that we did there. So that's the 3 of us there. And the first point is the Channel Islands had zero strategic value. I mean, absolutely none whatsoever. So if you saw some of the live streams I did last week, they have a crazy number of bunkers on the Channel Islands, and I will be showing you some photos in a minute. I mean, so many. Hitler became absolutely obsessed with the Channel Islands that there's no way the Allies would have considered landing there because of the defenses. And as some of you pointed out in the sidebar, the sheer unsuitability of most of the coastline. There are some beaches. There's a couple of beaches in Alderney. One side of Guernsey has some beaches, but most of the islands is rocky and treacherous and cliffs and steep inclines. It would be absurd to consider a big landing there. And what's the point? What are you going to do when you get there? What's you use it to leapfrog like the Pacific island campaign? Do you hop from one Channel Island to other and then hop from there back to France? There's just no point. So if you're unfamiliar with the Channel Islands, here's where they are. So that on the right there is normally, that's where I'm from. And then at the bottom, the largest of the Channel Islands is Jersey, which I didn't get to. Hi, Colin. Then up above that is Guernsey. Then you have Herm and Sark. And right at the top, there's Alderney. There's a few other little small ones as well. The closest to France is Alderney. It's just 8 miles away from the Cap up near Cherbourg. And so that's where they sit. They are just off the coast of France. And I've learned that I'm not going to get into today exactly how they govern themselves. They are sort of British, they're sort of not British. The bailiwick of Jersey, the bailiwick of Guernsey. Guernsey has some sort of control over Alderney and Sark, but they also have their own. It's very complicated. What I learned from Nicola Huray is they're kind of British when they want to be, and they're independent when they want to be, depending on the context. I'm a bit like that myself. Sometimes I'm European, sometimes I'm British, sometimes I'm English, sometimes I'm just me. It all depends on the circumstances. So I'm not going to get into their systems for governance, just to say it's a bit complicated, but cool, really cool. So I included this photo of the liberation of Northwest Europe, because as we know, we have talked about Normandy repeatedly on the channel. We covered the Brittany campaign back last August, September. That's the Brittany campaign. So the Channel Islands, if they were on that map, would be above in the blue sea, above Brittany, off, as you say, the coast, as I said, off the coast of Normandy. So they were bypassed. The Channel Islands weren't liberated until May 1945. So Guernsey was May the 9th, Alderney was May the 16th, and the other islands have different dates. And one thing I'll be discussing later on is the language the various islanders use about the events of May 1945 are interesting, because Alderney, and we'll get to this later, the population had decided to evacuate before the Germans arrived. A handful of people stayed on the islands, and thousands of slave laborers were brought there by the Third Reich to do work on the bunkers. But the islanders, although the liberation, or the British army, the British military, arrived in May 1945 to oversee the German surrender, the islanders didn't come back to December. So they have a homecoming day in Alderney. Guernsey was liberated, Jersey was liberated, but I say it gets complicated. So when I said they had strategic value, there is a but. And the but is, I was reminded of this by the volunteer at the underground hospital in Guernsey, and I'll show you photos later on, who was saying that all the effort, and we will get into the effort with some of the photos later, all the effort put into the Channel Islands by the Germans meant that effort wasn't going in somewhere else. Every German soldier billeted there, stationed there, every worker building fortifications there, every ton of steel, ton of concrete, plank of wood, round for a naval gun, every bullet, every bean, every bandage that was put on the Channel Islands to defend it was not sent somewhere else. Now, Dennis, you made up a good point there. They sort of have this idea. They are kind of protecting the channels. And when we talk about Alderney has, I think it's 18 Victorian forts. They have Roman fortifications on the islands, because that was to protect the seaways. You know, back in the age of sail, when the ships had to go, closer to land, that's when the islands were defended, because at that point there was pirates, there was all sorts of things going on there. There's the wars between the British and the French, etc., etc. The Channel Islands were important in that era. But by the time you get to the age of air power, which World War II was, the islands have a different purpose, or different threat, because air power could reduce some of the Victorian forts to rubble with the right application of bombs, etc., etc. I said bombs there, but I meant bombs. So they kind of are approaching and covering the approach to the U-boat bases further in Brittany, Dennis, but not really. I mean, if the Allies were going to come by sea to attack the ports down in Brest and La Rochelle, I mean, they wouldn't come anywhere near the Channel Islands. So, not really is the answer. So the but, though, is important. It is significant, because one of the things we talk about on this channel a lot is that nothing happens in a vacuum. So think of World War II as a big chessboard. So maybe the Channel Islands are the pawn on the right-hand side of the board that the master moves there, and then for the rest of the chess match, I don't play chess, so I'm not going. Don't pick me up on the details. The other player is using the other side of the board for his knights and his bishops and things like to attack. So that pawn doesn't get involved in the combat, but it causes the other player to use another part of the board. And I suppose that what was going on with the Channel Islands. The Allies didn't land there, didn't plan to attack. Well, they did consider landing there several times. There were numerous small-scale commando raids. We will have Nick Huray talk about that. Well, he has already been on the channel in our Channel Islands week a couple of years ago talking about that. So there were lots of sort of commando raids, although whether they are commando raids or reconnaissance raids or spying missions is all another issue, depending on how you define the various terms in World War II. So the Allies did definitely think about what they could glean from the Channel Islands. They did send commandos there, and they did in 1945 consider a landing there ahead of the actual eventual liberation. My granddad, in fact, who never left England in World War II and was in anti-aircraft and searchlights, was earmarked, so he says, to drive a radio truck ashore onto Jersey if the invasion of Jersey had happened. Now, I don't know how much of that was like rumors in his particular battery or whether that was a definite thing. I don't know, but you can look them up. There were plans that were obviously never, they were explored, but never unfolded to retake the Channel Lines, but it would have been incredibly costly. And what's the gain? So they have no strategic value at all, but they have this interesting aspect because of the fact the Germans are putting stuff there they could be putting elsewhere. So I'll put my slides back up again now, which brings me to the next point. They're kind of a showroom for the Atlantic Wall. Mag says they're like the IKEA showroom for the Atlantic Wall. Here's what you can build. And a lot of it, as to why they did it, well, it's Hitler's hubris. It's Hitler's pride. Why does he get obsessed about things like Stalingrad and Leningrad? Yes, of course, there's oil, there's strategic value, but it's also the names. He wants to have that bit of the Soviet Union. And I think, well, not I think, clearly Hitler thinks that if he has a piece of Britain, not technically Britain, but sort of Britain, then Churchill will be miffed about it, will want to do something about it. And him holding that ace over Churchill, if not causing Churchill to do something specific militarily to do it, will annoy Churchill. It'll be the itch he cannot scratch for Churchill during World War II. So I assume Hitler has this sense that he's got something over on the Allies, but the money he's pouring in there is crazy. And so one of the things JD and myself were talking about is how come we knew about the German defenses there, and yet we were surprised when we saw them. I can't still work out how I managed to paradoxically both know about the extensive fortifications all over the Channel Islands and at the same time be completely surprised when I saw them. I think it's because you can read there's lots and lots of bunkers there, and you can read the tonnage of cement used. You can see the plans of the feeder stones. There's some gun batteries by the coast, but like anything else, as Jim and Al say on their podcast, you've got to walk the ground. You've got to see it. And by about 3 hours into our tour of Guernsey with Amanda Johns, a tour guide whose link is in the description below, we realized that although we were passing bunkers that we normally would have stopped and looked at, she was taking us to even better bunkers. So we just kind of rode with it and realized there's an insane amount of stuff. So this is the underground hospital in Guernsey, which we had a private tour of after hours by Paul, one of the volunteers there of Festung Guernsey, are involved in this. And there's a link to the underground hospital below. So it's just hundreds and hundreds of meters of underground tunnels that was designed initially to be an ammunition storage area, and they dug and used explosives directly into the rock, Guernsey granite, basically, to dig out meters after meters after meters of underground passages. And I've got footage of all this stuff there. And it never got fully used for ammunition storage, and it never got fully used as a hospital. Because, as we said, the Channel Lines never ended up having that importance. But all of the stuff that they were doing there is mind-blowingly incredible in terms of the engineering. And this is, I think, one of our takeaways, is that it's not the quantity of bunkers there, although that was impressive. It was the quality. Now, you've heard me talk about in Normandy, and I've had experts on about the degrading of the bunkers over time, the degrading of the quality of build. The early bunkers in Normandy 42 and 43 are poured concrete with the wooden shuttering to make the concrete nice and strong. They are made with experts, etc., etc. By 43, certainly by 44, they're dragging sand off the beaches at Omaha to make cement. They're using poor grade materials. They haven't got the wood anymore to shore up the bunkers, so they're using the block technique. That's all they can do. So You don't see that in Guernsey. What you see in Guernsey and Alderney is just continually good quality bunkers being put in right up till June 44. So even when the Allies are passing down the Normandy Peninsula, heading towards Brittany, they're still delivering wood to Alderney to make new bunkers. I mean, the defenders in Normandy would have bitten their right arm off for the materials that were going to the Channel Islands come the spring of 44. There were beach obstacles in Guernsey and Alderney as well, beach obstacles that would have been much better used in Normandy. So much information I had about the bunkers there was kind of overridden by what I saw when I got there. So there's bunkers and there's bunkers. So there's good bunkers and there's bad bunkers in Normandy. All the bunkers in the Channel Islands that I saw are high quality bunkers. So I'll go back to the slides and show you what I've got. So that was the Underground Hospital. This is the Myris battery. We saw that on our first complete day in Guernsey. So these are 30.5 centimeter guns. So that's a massive, great gun. That's 12 inches diameter shell, range of 30 odd miles, wherever it was. I forget the details. We'll cover all this in detail later on. And these at face value look like the gun circles you see at Merville Battery or at Point du Hoc. The difference is that they have the other layer below them of the underground fortifications, the tunnels, the rooms, the engineering, the pulleys to pull stuff up, the hoists, the machinery shops, etc., etc., etc. This is underground at the Myris Battery, and we were led through there by Amanda John. So railways that go through there, hoists, engineering, escape shafts, air circulation, showers, toilets, the whole lot there. I mean, absolutely mind-blowing. And if this was just the only gun battery in Guernsey, it would be impressive. It's one of loads. I mean, there's like 4 like this on Guernsey, 3 like this on Alderney. Everything that seemed to go there was state of the art. It's Pak 40s, it's 88mm guns, it's German-made naval guns, not foreign stuff. There are some foreign guns on the Channel Islands, but it's not Skoda, it's not Polish, it's not French, it's arguably kind of state-of-the-art German guns going in there. It's absolutely crazy. The other thing about the exploration of the bunkers is the setting. And I'll get to this later on when I get to just how beautiful the Channel Islands are, is that they're all kind of carved into these beautiful cliffscapes, and the layering. That's the other thing, the layering of bunkers there. You have, on Alderney, for example, you have Roman fortifications. There's a place called the Nunnery in Alderney where there are Roman walls with the herringbone patterned stones. Then there's Victorian emplacements. Then there's German emplacements built on top. And then now, because there's so many bunkers in place there to preserve some of them have been sold off to private homes. So they're now putting another layer on with windows and patios and all the kind of stuff you'd need to live there. So it's like seeing, those in the museums, those kind of they show you those kind of geological layers when they're talking about the age of the earth and then all that kind of stuff. You're seeing it in kind of real time in Channel Islands. You're seeing the original kind of Roman stuff, the Victorian stuff, all kind of melded together in a strange hodgepodge of brilliance and naivety. It's incredible. There's one of the observation or control towers on Guernsey. So each level of the control bunker has an opening for a rangefinder, and each rangefinder connects to a specific gun battery. So they either have 3 openings or 4 openings, depending on how many gun batteries they're controlling. And again, state-of-the-art, decent gun batteries. So I didn't go to Jersey on this trip. I only have went to Guernsey and Alderney. If Jersey would like to invite me, I'll go there sometime in the future. But right now, it is Guernsey and Alderney. So about 10% minimum of the concrete used on the Atlantic Wall was poured in the Channel Islands. Some people say it might be nudging 20%. There are various debates as to how much concrete was used. It depends whether you count the U-boat pens down in La Rochelle and Brest as part of the Atlantic Wall. I mean, they are sort of face Atlantic. They're built to attack the Allies. Are they part of that? Are they not? But even just 10%. When you consider the Atlantic Wall runs from Norway all the way down to the border with Spain, even 5% of the Atlantic Wall for just, let me remind you, Guernsey is about 24 square miles, 26 square miles. I think Alderney is about 6 square miles. I'm not sure the size of Jersey, it's the biggest one, but add all the coastlines together, it's not that much. So 10% of the whole amount. So this is one of the naval range finding towers on Alderney. It's known as the Odeon. That wasn't its German name in World War II because the locals after the war thought it looked a bit like kind of the boxes, the balconies you get in the old Odeon cinemas back in Britain in the 30s and what have you. So it's called the Odeon, but it has a real name. I think it's M19 or something. And so there we are. That's what it looks like. So you have 3 levels, 3 rangefinders, each connected to its own specific gun battery just on Alderney. So 3 massive gun batteries just on Alderney. This is the underground hospital in Alderney, and we were taken there by Caroline, who works for Alderney Tourism. And I'll get to this, I'll repeat this when I get to one of my points later on. What's amazing about this is it was all overgrown and uncovered until 2023. And then within 11 months, a team of volunteers who are the tourist workers and people who live on the island are in there digging it out with kind of buckets and spades, cleaning it all up. And it was open to the public with labeling inside it, lighting about 11 months later or 9 months later. Incredible how much effort they're doing to make this stuff available. And I'm just going to go through where these bunkers are. I mean, the Alderney had one of the most impressive, still existing, easy to see, 6-gun 88mm anti-aircraft batteries. So 6 88mm guns, again with underground positions, tunnels between the two. You can still see some of the camouflage on some of these emplacements. This is one of the openings of Vida Stances facing out over one of the bays there. I mean, we could have spent, 3 weeks there going. This is the position you were talking about in the sidebar, the nunnery. So you've got Roman stuff there, you've got Victorian stuff beside it, and then you've got the World War II. So this is where a pack howitzer could be wheeled out of this bunker through little grooves to then face down a particular direction down the beach. And that is a kind of a sort of a half replica, half original gun. I think it's not a Pack 40. I think it's a Pack 37. So one of the people in the museum said, but forgive me, we'll go through all this stuff when we do the proper shows later on. And there's a bit of an anti-tank wall. Now, in Normandy, there's a little bit of anti-tank wall if it isn't covered by sand on Utah. There's a little bit of museum. There is another bit in a campsite up near between Carbourg and Deauville, me and Colin found last year or the year before, but you have to be staying on the campsite to see it. There's about, I don't know, 30 meters. Here you've got a whole bay done, and it's like twice the size, twice the thickness of the anti-tank walls in Normandy. And it had barbed wire on the top, etc., etc. And JD did lots of filming of this with his drone. So all the good footage of the bunker will be on JD's History Underground show. Now, even defending this bay, who's going to land there? Why? We've addressed this away. And then up on the hill behind it, you can see one of the bunkers up there. Just incredible stuff all over the place. No, there was been no thought to removing this stuff. A couple here and there have dropped away because of erosion and cliffs changing, things like that. But, digging out concrete that is up to 3 meters thick, reinforced all the way through, would take ages. So what's happened is, whether they like it or not, is they have just accepted that they are there. They're working around them. And I'll get to this when I talk about the Channel Islanders and their reactions to it later on. The 80-year process since the end of war, their views about the past have changed and have evolved. And we'll get to that in a minute. This is one of the gun positions again. I mean, I could just go on to keep on showing you these photos, but I want to talk about this. I've already hinted at this. One of the things about the fact that Guernsey has its own government, Alderney has its own government, but is also kind of part of Guernsey, is that there seems to be a distinct lack of red tape getting in the way of things. Now, in Normandy, for example, Omaha Beach, which is the most visited of the beaches, we've done the shows with Michael Ackerman, 3 villages or small towns have jurisdiction, so to speak, over Omaha. So Vierville-sur-Mer, Saint-Laurent-sur-Mer, and Colville-sur-Mer. So they've been living side by side, these communities, for thousands of years. They can't really agree on how to sort out long-term things like parking and public bathrooms and signage in the bunkers, things like that. And the wheels move very slowly in France. And I think, although I love Normandy, and I absolutely do love Normandy, there's a complacency about all of us in Normandy, including the tour guides, is that tourists come in their droves. About 4 million people come to Normandy every year. 2 million, we know, went to the American Cemetery last year. So between 4 and 5 million come every year. So the restaurants don't necessarily have to make huge amounts of effort. The people will see the bunkers, whether they're labeled or not. There are tour guides there pointing out things all the time. In the Channel Islands, they now want people to go there and see what their islands have to offer, both in terms of World War II tourism and all the other things they get to, and I'll get to that later on in this presentation. But they really genuinely care. As soon as people found out who we were, the taxi drivers, the people, the waiters serving us our meals, the people on the boat, the people everywhere were asking, so what are you doing here? Have you seen the bunker down the road there? Have you called in and seen this bit of there? Have you looked at the museum that covers this? And because we're talking about relatively small populations, I think Guernsey's about 63,000. I think Alderney's about 2,500, something like that. They kind of seem to know all know each other, and they seem to be working together towards this ultimate goal of making people aware of their unique vision of World War II. And JD, myself, and Mag, we're in the Prio Library in Guernsey, and you may have seen the little live stream I did there, and JD did some proper content there. So it was quite difficult to get our head around what we were seeing there, because they had these big bound volumes of original newspapers from World War II. So there were levels of kind of journalism going on there that was slightly different. So there were underground newspapers or newsletters produced by the locals and resistance groups. GASP was one in Guernsey, and GUNS, the Guernsey Underground News Service, and GASP was something else. So they are containing genuine information from the BBC about what's going on. Then there are the Guernsey or Channel Islands press that have some leeway to report their own news. So if they're reporting, I don't know, the score of a cricket match, I don't even know they had cricket matches, but that kind of thing, that's not being censored because it's just day-to-day news. So things about, obituaries, that's kind of carrying on as normal. But of course, the serious content about the war was being censored by the Germans. And then there were German-produced publications in German language for people stationed on the island. So there's different types of press going on there. And what we were looking at there was Mag asked to see the June the 7th, because there was obviously very little reporting done on June the 6th because they didn't have the information to report 1944 about D-Day till the day after, when the press releases were there. And I said this in the live stream, I think last week, is the Germans are telling the press to downplay the success. The invasion has been met with massive resistance. They are ships are being sunk out of the water. Units have been entirely wiped out. The Allies will just get bogged down like they were in Italy, etc., etc. And now we're used to the fact that Germans had their propaganda machine working in German. We understand that in occupied Netherlands, occupied Belgium, they're pumping out stuff in German. They're pumping out stuff in French. But it was like a disconnect for me to read English, because my brain is kind of telling me that English language news sources from World War II are normally pretty trustworthy. Okay, they didn't have all the other information. But now you're reading British press, but it's not really British, from the Channel Islands, heavily monitored by the Germans about the events. And that caused me to have these real sort of moments of, And you said there, Stuart, the islanders in Alderney are still sensitive about people theorizing about how many slave laborers died there. Absolutely the case there. We met a couple of different historians there, Colin and Trevor, on separate occasions, who have slightly different views about it. The tourist board have slightly different views. There was an inquiry, the Pickles report, a couple of years ago, that kind of tried to look at exactly what the documentation says about the slave laborers there, how many were there, whether or not there were SS in charge of all of them. Some of them, there were 4 forced labor camps, one of which you would describe as a concentration camp. There were deaths, but exactly how you would label it. Is it part of the Holocaust? Sort of, but sort of not as well. How many people died there? Well, about 400 officially, but it could have been more. So this is going on as well about that aspect in Alderney. And this comes to the a point I'm going to come to later on, number 4, I think. But basically, everybody I met cared about the history. And if you have an opinion about the slave laborers and you want to share your opinion, it's because you care. They may have different views about how it's remembered, what the data is, and the various historians and academics and politicians involved in this, but they absolutely do care about the story. For years after war, it seems even across all of the Channel Islands, there was a broad sense of let's just move on. Let's try and get back to how things were before the war, which I guess was happening generally across Europe. Yeah, well, it's the most famous one, Meg Rebel, Zilt. We went there, did some filming there. So they all did care about it, and we will be, as we go through this series, we will be telling you about all the associations, the Festung Guernsey, the people in Alderney, the museums, all these groups of people who are working together in very small numbers. I mean, the Festung Guernsey, you are uncovering, it seems like a new bunker every few weeks in Guernsey, is about kind of 15 to 20 regular volunteers. And when I say volunteers, they're not just, scouring for pictures on the internet. They're out there physically digging out bunkers. Often you can't get diggers and machinery into the location, so you have to dig stuff out by hand. So extraordinary stuff going on there, and we were really impressed with the consistent labeling across the bunkers, the consistent means of providing information to the visitor. The signage was very good. There were public bathrooms in the right places. There were those collecting things to pick up the polythene bags, to pick up your dog shit, all that kind of stuff. So incredibly knowledgeable and incredibly interested in why we were there, and they really care about the history. This is JD interviewing Richard, the owner, curator, mastermind of the Guernsey Occupation Museum, or the German Occupation Museum in Guernsey, which is mostly his own personal collection. And we could have spent hours there. He has field guns, horses and carts, a fire engine, machine guns, uniforms, documentation, newspapers, photos, newsreels, all there. He's pretty much done the whole thing himself by hand. That's JD interviewing him in the museum's kind of cafe come tea room there. This is a typical part of his museum there. So a big poster about the liberation on May the 8th. And then a searchlight in the back there with a mannequin, all this kind of stuff there. He was incredibly knowledgeable. He was telling us all about his deeds digging out these bunkers back in the day. He nearly got locked in one. He was kind of digging in the ground back in the 60s, and people thought it was something untoward going on, so they kind of filled in the entrance behind him. He had to dig himself out. All sorts of things going on there. This is the three of us meeting a couple of the ladies from the Alderney Tourism Board, Alex and Caroline, who were taking us around there. That was the last day. You can tell by our smiles just how much we enjoyed it all. This is in Guernsey. After our trip, we'd got back. We had about an hour before taking our ferry back to San Malo. This is about the Queen, the late Queen, visiting there back in the day to look at the liberation monuments, etc. There in Guernsey. There's quotations by Churchill. There's things all there in Guernsey, etc. So lots of stuff there. And this brings me to the next point. The civilian experience across the Channel Islands varied. Now, I'm sure there are some of you watching who, even knowing a little bit about the Channel Islands, this is kind of maybe your first real foray into what was going on there. And they kind of obviously get referenced as the Channel Islands, but as I've been trying to get to, their experiences across from island to island were very different. So the people of Alderney left. They left before the Germans got there, and that meant the Germans, when they were building what they built there, had basically carte blanche to do exactly what they did. They kind of did what they wanted to do wherever they occupied in Europe. But there, they particularly, with no civilians in the way at all, they just went to work with this as I said earlier, kind of showroom type demonstration of the potential of what the Atlantic Wall could be was going on there. Now they had to do the work somehow, so this is where the forced laborers came in. They came from I remember Colin Partridge, the expert, saying 27 different countries provided, that makes it sound like it was willing, had people taken away to build these bunkers, to build these fortifications. They had a reasonably sophisticated infrastructure for putting the bunkers together. They had hoppers, so wet cement could be poured into the back of trucks and taken up. So there is some sophistication. There are rail lines. There are some cranes being used, but at the same time, there's a huge amount of just physical labor by human beings at the bottom to get it done. And of course, it wasn't easy work. They were treated pretty badly, and as I said earlier, about 400 or so did them. So on Alderney, Kevin, there were no locals there to do any work. That's why they had to bring forced laborers in, which is why I'm addressing the fact that each island had a different response. So Guernsey and Jersey were occupied. The Germans basically pulled up. Some islanders had managed to leave earlier, and then some were able to leave because they weren't affected by the war directly. So there are American, Irish people living on islands. Irish people were allowed to leave. Red Cross would bring in letters. There were Red Cross parcels delivered by aircraft. I mean like dropped in baskets. So some of the Irish who were allowed to stay, who weren't technically occupied because they were neutral. Some were working for the Allies, really, although they kind of allowed themselves to think they were friendly with the Germans, but it was so they could conceal what they were really doing. There were deportations of people for various reasons. If you had Jewish ancestry, people who were political, there were evacuees. There were all sorts of different movements across the islands, from island to island, from island to the mainland. So the experiences were very different, depending on where you were and depending on your ancestry, your race, your classification, your age, your sex, all that. So just as we can't say there was one experience for the French across France, there wasn't one experience for Channel Islands. It depends on who you were and what your role was, and essentially how you labeled yourself and how the Germans thought. Some were taken, as you said there, to camps in Germany, and not nice camps, but we're not talking about, well, some were taken to concentration camps, some were taken to Ravensbrück, some were taken out, some were deported and killed, but some of the people from Guernsey and Jersey were taken. We did a show with Dr. Julie Carr a couple of years ago, were taken to, internment camps. They weren't exactly pleasant, but Red Cross parcels got through and they had heating and things like that. So it as always, David Kay, it's complicated. But what I think, one benefit of us going there 80 years on, and I've lived 8 miles away, the Cherbourg Peninsula is 8 miles away from Alderney for 24 years, and I'd never been to Channel Islands, and we kept talking about it and just never got around to it. Mac had been to Jersey years and years ago, but not for a long time. I think if we'd been perhaps 20 years ago, we'd have caught some of the locals in a different period from where they are now. So Caroline, for example, who took us around in Alderney, I think she's been there for 17 years. So she's very much the new generation who have accepted that the bunkers are there, have interviewed all the people from the war, but she wasn't there herself. Obviously, she's much younger. And so she's part of the new generation who are not just, let's just forget about the war. Let's talk about the war, but let's talk about it in the context of the museums, the associations there. Let's open things up, let people come and see for themselves what the Germans were doing there, and so on. So resistance is interesting because, as you know, I've talked about a lot on this channel. When we had Dr. Chris Millington on a couple of years ago, and he was talking about the words of resistance and collaboration being they come with we know what we think we know what they mean. They're loaded, right? So when we think of resistance, we think of people blowing up trains. We think of the typical French guy with a beret, a cigarette, going out and blowing up a train, or we think of the uprising in Warsaw in Poland, so armed resistance. And when we think of collaboration, we sometimes think of people marching up to Gestapo headquarters to offer their services to the enemy, to the occupiers, and nasty farmers in various countries kind of bringing down pilots in by pitchfork for reward. That's what we think of as collaboration. Chris Millington proposes, and we've talked about this numerous times, that the words are defiance and accommodation, because there's really no possibility of armed resistance there, because there's nowhere to go, there's nowhere to hide. So it's like when we talk about these commando raids and command and spy missions, that sometimes they went with weapons and they were trying to take back German personnel or get details of German fortifications, but often it's just gathering information. They're reconnaissance missions, trying to build up a picture of how the German defenses work, what they were doing there, who the garrisons are, all that kind of information. So resistance can be as much as just making the life of the occupiers awkward. And we saw it in the Prio Library, we saw it in the museums, all sorts of examples of little gadgets and things like that the locals are doing to pass messages, hide things. They found all sorts of clever ways of hiding their radios, all those kind of things. And there were underground newspapers. There was, as you said there, Stuart, there was the campaign of painting V for victory, and that's one of the things that I was intrigued by, that it again allowed me to explore my idea of what is resistance, what is compliance, what is accommodation. And the Channel Islands, if there's one thing I learned from them while I was there, is they can be a feisty lot. They're very they speak their minds, the ones we've spoken to. They'll tell you what they think. They have differing views on things, but they didn't like being occupied by the Nazis. Who likes being occupied by the Nazis? So they did what they could to slow down the German protocol, to make things difficult. They've tried where they could to sort of sabotage defenses. They put, we were told about them putting like trying to put weaker blends of cement in, things like that. They were trying to just do what they could. But I mean, there's so many Germans there and so much concrete, but you like to think you're doing something. So their experiences were really varied. And I think that's something I want to get across to you when we do these proper shows. And one of the reasons I haven't got the video content ready is I'm not really sure yet exactly what angles I'm going to come from when I do this Channel Island coverage. So I did the Channel Islands week a couple of years ago, and I just had the experts coming on talking about what they wanted to. But this time, I'm conscious of the fact that our trip was courtesy of the two tourist organizations there. So we want to make sure we sell the islands to visitors and help bring tourists there, because it's a fantastic place. But I also have my own ideas about what I'd like to cover, the complexities, the nuances, things like the slave labor, but try and do it from a wide-ranging point of view. Try and have some panel discussions where we get into things like what the bunkers mean to people, what liberation means, or in, as I say, homecoming day in December 45, when the people from Alderney came back. Can you imagine if you've been living in Alderney all your life and you stepped back off that boat in December 1945 and you saw the frankly shitloads of bunkers everywhere, some of which were built over your home maybe, and the stories of what they had to do after the war to get enough firewood, to get enough food, because good grief. I mean, they were burning down huts. And this is one of the reasons the information about the slave labor camps is muddled a bit, because the barrack huts and things like that were burnt down. Now, they may have been burnt down by the Germans to cover up what they were doing. They may also have been burnt down because the islanders there needed firewood. And the truth is, it's somewhere between. It's both, really. So we're going to try and cover all the aspects of it, and yes, Stuart, I've got a link to Nick's podcast in the description below. Islands at War, fantastic. We will be talking about the German point of view in terms of the experts there and what they learned. I mean, Richard at the Occupation Museum interviewed a number of German officers. Trevor from the Alderney Museum there had interviewed various Germans there. He published some of their interviews in the Alderney newsletter. So that there was one boat arrived one day in the war with two Germans in the same flak unit, I think they were. And one guy was in his late 30s, and he was I forget what Trevor said he was now. He was something like a pianist or a botanist, something very kind of warlike, and the other guy was like an 18-year-old piss and vinegar young German recruit, and they both talked about their experiences in Guernsey, in Alderney, with the same unit, but their experiences were very different. In the Occupation Museum, one of the Germans had left a note in English for the people of around where he'd been billeted, saying, I hope, your post-war experience is really good. I hope things go well for you. I hope things get back to normal. And so we will be trying to present the German viewpoint to being there, because, for me in my 50s, with all the restaurants and stuff, it was a beautiful, idyllic place to spend time. But if you're a young German soldier, sure, you could have been on the Eastern Front fighting in Leningrad or something, but the life on the Channel Islands, Alderney particularly, or Sark, not many open pubs and things like that now, let alone, as I say, with the people of Alderney having gone. If you were stationed there, there's the labor camps, and then there's your fellow soldiers, and the wind and the weather can change very quickly. I was there obviously at the end of March. The weather was pretty good. Most of you can imagine being there in December and January, and the wind is howling across. So the Germans were dealing with loneliness. One of the things about the Germans who are buried there, Nick took us to one of the cemeteries in Guernsey, and there are Germans who died of natural causes, heart attacks. There are some, a handful, who were killed in air raids, and there are others who committed suicide. So there's things like that to consider, the impact on the Germans who are there, as well as the impact on the locals, as well as the British troops who liberated in May 1945. So lots to get into. We'll be interviewing the various people we met in various shapes and forms, and I'll be using some of the video footage I took for that. Although really, I was there to meet the people to plan this ongoing World War II TV style content for the channel, whereas JD was doing more of the JD History Underground, going around doing his history on the spot. Here's what this is. So the two channels will kind of complement each other as we go on. So I want to get across that civilian experience, and as I say, the German experience, and indeed the British liberating experience. The last point is just how beautiful they were. I mean, the scenery was absolutely majestic. I mean, again, I'd seen photos, I'd seen videos, I've seen documentaries, but you walk these coastal paths and it's breathtaking view after breathtaking view, and the yellow gorse bushes and the granite sticking up there, and these little coves and bays. And that was us when the sun was just about to kind of start going down there on Guernsey there. Beautiful color skies, German bunkers everywhere, rocks everywhere, gorse bushes, heather. We heard pheasants tootling about there and there. There were yellow hedgehogs on Alderney, which we did, blonde hedgehogs, which I had never saw. I'd love to see one of them. I mean, just hopefully these photos are giving you an idea of the beauty of the islands. That's us coming in to Alderney from Guernsey on the ferry, which is a sort of 12-person like fishing tour. On the journey back, it wasn't rough, but it was getting towards rough. Me and JD were sitting outside, and we were both thinking that we weren't sick, but we were only like one notch away from feeling a bit sick. And it was about an hour and a quarter, it's 30 odd kilometers across from Guernsey to Alderney. So, and we couldn't go by aircraft because of the weather that day and fog and things like. We didn't go on the e-bike in the end. The weather was setting in. We ended up using the States of Alderney Ford pickup, which JD was very at home with. So it was fantastic. I mean, hopefully these photos are giving you an idea of just how pretty the place was, and just layer that's around. So the beach to the top left is back in the Bray Bay. So our hotel in Alderney was there, and then we've come round. That was our last stop before we had to go down and catch the boat, and all those bunkers down in front of us, and just gorgeous, just absolutely gorgeous, and the food. So I don't normally do a little montage of the meals I had. And if you know Mag, some of you know Mag is French. Her family, I hope she's probably watching, Mag's family come from farming and restaurant owners. They've produced cheese, sold cheese, all that kind of stuff. So Mag, being French, has high expectations for food when she travels. And let's just say that some of the English food she's had in England, she's liked some things, but some of it she's been a bit meh. She's a bit meh about French food. She's a bit about food. she's got high standards. Mag is still raving about the food in Guernsey and Alderney, so that is something. So it's kind of British with a French kind of influence there as well. That's bangers and mash I had for lunch at, that was the Imperial, with link to all these restaurants in the description below. So this is the Woody does Jamie Oliver. Woody does Bake Off and talks about the food we had there. The beef, let me tell you about the beef Wellington we had. Oh God, it was the best beef Wellington I think I've had. We all had it. Me, JD, Mag, not the same bit because it's not that big, but wonderful stuff. Wonderful stuff. That was a fantastic butter chicken curry sandwich we had at the Old Government House restaurant in Guernsey in St. Peter Port, with an absolutely fantastic mango chutney and these sort of oniony bit in the top dish there and a salad there. Oh my God, that was probably my favorite meal. The other two loved the beef Wellington. That I'm still got that little tingle in my mouth from the curry sandwich there. And it came with fries and onion rings. They just bought us onion rings. That was a half rack of ribs we had as a starter at the slaughterhouse. JD loved the name of the slaughterhouse. That was a steak we had in the slaughterhouse. It was one of the best steaks I've had for ages. Fantastic. Fish and chips we had in Alderney. I think JD had fish and chips 3 times during the week. He always takes the green stuff off because he doesn't like the green stuff, with a lovely garlic butter and everything. Mags heard me talk about the food. She's just come in there now. I think she sniffed the food there. World War II food reviews, as we say there, Jim. And that was a bread and butter pudding. I haven't had bread and butter pudding for ages, and it looks a bit kind of square, but bread and butter pudding with ice cream, caramel. So, oh my God. So let me tell you about the food. Even a sandwich, a basic common club sandwich was really good with a fried egg on top. That was the last kind of late afternoon, half lunch, half dinner we had with Nick before we got the ferry back to San Marlo. So that's some of the idea of the food there. So hopefully it's given you a bit of an idea where we're going with this series and what we're going to be doing. We're going to be speaking to the people from these associations. And it was an absolutely incredible time. And I'm kicking myself that I hadn't been before. I don't know. I've got no excuse. I just, it was like, yeah, we'll go at some point, and we just never did. And now we have. And I need to reinforce the idea is that Visit Alderney and Visit Guernsey are really working hard to get people over there. Now you have to go go out of your comfort zone a little bit to get to Alderney, particularly. Guernsey's easier. There's a ferry from San Marlo. There are direct flights from Dublin. This is now it's Woody's travel reviews. Now it's like the holiday program back with what's her face back in the 80s. Not Gloria Hannaford, the other one. You'll think of who it is. And Cliff Mitchellmore. This Woody does Cliff Mitchellmore. To Alderney, you can fly from Guernsey to Alderney. There's a ferry in the summer from Dillet, south of Cherbourg, across to Alderney. And then there's the little boat that often runs when the aircraft can't run because of fog. And everybody in Alderney has a story of, well, we planned to come back on the Tuesday, but we had to stay an extra day and we came back on the Wednesday, because you have to kind of deal with the fact that fog comes in and things like that. But it's worth it. It is just so worth it. Mag and I are already talking about going there and just doing a week there with her girls and just going and doing World War II stuff and having great food and doing hill walks and walking around those beaches, maybe using the e-bikes and all that kind of stuff. So yes, there are ferries from San Marlo, Sheldrake. So Brittany Ferries have just taken over the Condor run. So it's about our ferry there stopped at Jersey, and we had to go off and get our passports checked, and then back on the ferry, and then on our way to Guernsey. And on the way back, we just went straight from Guernsey back to San Marlo. So if you don't stop, it's about an hour and a half, something like that. If you stop in Jersey, it's about 2 hours. But perfectly pleasant and perfectly easy. Also, all there are flights. So that's it. So the Channel Islands is one of those topics in World War II that if you're watching this and thinking, well, I don't really care. There were no battles there. And JD and I and myself are having this discussion because, when he's going to somewhere like the Hürgen Forest, or he's just done a video today or yesterday about the German cemeteries for the Battle of the Bulge, that there was that direct combat there. That World War II the outcome of World War II was shaped on the ground around there. If you're standing on Omaha Beach, the events there helped liberate Europe. If you're standing in Warsaw, the uprising there leads to other things, the standoff with Stalin, Cold War. You can feel that you're part of a timeline that changed things. And we're going back to that first point about the Channel Islands having no strategic value. So, well, it's not quite that nothing happened there. It's that the nothing that happened there meant that there were no invasion beaches. People didn't die on those obstacles. They didn't die running up towards the anti-tank wall. Those guns, I mean, they fired a bit. The Myras battery we went to in Guernsey, I think it fired 51 times in World War II. It was even firing towards Normandy at the kind of time of the Saint-Lô battle, but they weren't influential. It's not like the Crisbeck guns in Normandy. You got the USS Rich, the Meredith, and the other one, the Corrie, were all hit mines off the Utah coast on June the 6th. So you can stand at those gun battles and say, yes, they had an influence on how the campaign was fought. There was the 4th Infantry Division pushing their way up via Asville and Crisbeck to the Kinneville Ridge, lots of lives cost taking there. Yet Alderney, where all this concrete was poured, the British just turned up to the German surrender. I mean, there'd been lots of things happening before that, and they were bypassed. But just because there was no actual fighting there doesn't mean they don't have this interest, which brings me back to that point about no strategic importance, but yet nothing happens in a vacuum. And you have to just go there. And I think JD and I had this, what we were thinking is how does Hitler's obsession with the Channel Islands, and it is obsessive. I mean, he's like a stalker of the Channel Islands. I mean, he would be put on a restraining order. You know, Adolf, you're getting obsessed by these islands. Quite why it was, we've discussed that. It's because he could have a bit of Britain, he can piss off Churchill, but this obsession was obviously driving him even more insane. And where does that pouring of 10% of the concrete used on the Atlantic Wall in the Channel Islands rate on Hitler's big mistakes in World War II? Obviously, Barbarossa's a big one, right at the top there. And there are other mistakes there, not sort of coordinating things, arguments at the high level, not working very well with Italy. There are lots of things that Hitler gets wrong, but you have to add the Channel Islands into Hitler's big mistakes. And what were the Third Reich thinking? And yet the other angle is, coming back to the showroom idea, is that we know the Atlantic Wall ultimately failed. It lasted minutes on some beaches on D-Day. It lasted hours elsewhere, and huge chunks of it from Norway, the Netherlands, Denmark, blah, 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 never really saw combat at all. There's some bunkers in the Scheldt Estuary that saw combat in September, October 1944, but most Atlantic Wall never got put to the test, and neither did the stuff in Alderney. As you say, they were. You just mentioned that the Alderney guns were firing towards Cherbourg. Sure, they fired, but they didn't really influence things. You do have to wonder what might have happened if Hitler had slowed down his ambition instead of trying to do everything in a short couple of weekends almost. Poland in 1939 and France and those countries in 1940, and then Soviet Union, just after that. If he had just slowed down and done it more incrementally and spent years building the Atlantic Wall rather than effectively months, because then you wonder what would have happened if his campaign had been slow. I mean, I don't like counterfactuals. I don't like talking about what didn't happen but this showroom aspect, the showroom of bunkers in Alderney and Jersey and Guernsey show the potential of what the Atlantic Wall could have been. Now, you could say, well, it was never going to be that. They couldn't have possibly made it all as good as that. Yeah, I agree with you. But there's that kind of what if. It's like the V1 rockets that were overrun before they fired in the Cotentin in 1944. It's like the ME-262. What if they'd had that a few weeks earlier? What if? We know the Germans were destined to lose the war from about 1940-41 onwards. They bit off too much and the Allies get themselves together. But I like the idea of the Channel Islands getting you to just stop and think. Just think about some of the German ambitions, what the Third Reich were up to. Could they have done this? Could they have done that? And just go for yourself and see what the Atlantic Wall could have been, what Hitler's vision was for it. It's a bit like, we know about the German ambition for Germania and Albert Speer and all that kind of stuff. There, we see the illustrations of what they wanted for Europe after their victory in the war. And we see little bits, if anyone was at Stuart Bertie's talk we have Ways last year about some of the German architecture, there are little bits of examples of where the Germans were going with architecture and train stations and buildings, things like that give us a hint of what the Germans would have done if they'd won. And the Atlantic Wall in the Channel Lines gives us that hint of what the Germans were trying to achieve. And we can just be grateful that they didn't, that the Germans made shitloads of mistakes and the Allies got their act together and were able to stop it, nip it in the bud, really. I mean, I say nip it in the bud. We're talking 50 million people died in World War II, so we didn't nip it as early as we could have done. But what could have happened if we hadn't come together? So there we are. Megalomaniac in scope, MIDI doctors. Yes, I mean, and I think that's it. It's just seeing what they could have done. And give yourself a nice pub meal and some nice food, and have these wonderful volunteers and these wonderful museums open so you can see what was there. So that's it. That's what I'm going to do today. Tomorrow we are looking at Arnhem from the German perspective. Marcel Zwartz is on talking about his new book, which I've got a copy of, an absolute jam-packed full of photos and maps. It's an expensive one, but boy, is it. If you're an Arnhem aficionado, you need to get his book. So he's going to come on tomorrow and talk about his work behind that into the German armored divisions and armored units defending Arnhem. We've got Mark Milner is on Friday talking about his new book and the somewhat strained relationship between the British and the Americans and the Canadians in 1944, planning Normandy. So that's kind of a slightly controversial, against the grain, as we would expect from Mark Milner, view of that period, 1944, maybe not quite as harmonious as we thought. We have Anthony Tucker-Jones coming on Thursday talking about the Rhineland campaign. So you remember we had Kevin Hiemel on, we had Josh on, we did other shows about the push into Germany. Well, he's going to be looking at it from the Germany point of view and how they were defending it, what their options were, what their strategy was. So that's quite cool. Now, next week, there'll be less because I'm popping off to London because I am going to be filmed as a talking head for a new documentary series. You may have seen me, if you're friends with me on Facebook, talk about this. This is the one that Tom Hanks is producing. So I'm going to do that. And I have, in the middle of April, my mum's funeral to go to, a very sad time. Thank you for expressing your condolences about my mum's passing the Saturday before last. So I have the funeral to go to. So April is a real mix of emotions for me. You can understand I'm really excited about the documentary work. And I also have to go and pay respects to my mum. So a lot going on for me in April. By the time we get to May, it'll be much more steady. The output will be coming out consistently, and I'll be back on. We're talking about the liberation of the camps. We've got various things coming up. So I've had to kind of push back a couple of shows for April. So that the schedule for this month will be a little bit hit and miss depending on where I am and what I'm doing. I do want to remind people once again that if you are liking what we're doing here on the channel, please consider becoming a patron. On the first of a month, I go to my Patreon account and I always see the people whose credit cards have run out or they've not updated their cards. So my income drops at the beginning of the month. So I lost maybe 20 patrons today. Maybe they don't no longer want to subscribe, or more likely their credit card details haven't been updated. So if you are a patron and you signed up some time ago, please log in and just check that your details are up to date if you've changed cards so that the payments keep coming through. So and if you haven't ever considered becoming a subscriber, please do so, because this is my sole thing now. I do a little bit of guiding, but I haven't got time because this is taking me all the time. And Stuart is going to be on in May. Yes, exactly, Stuart. You're talking about your Night Fighters. So there's another person making the transition from viewer to guest historian, although he's doing other podcasting as well, and his book's coming out. So there we are. So that's it. So just over an hour. I was hoping to keep this to an hour. So I remind you again, all the resources I have been using are in the description below. The restaurants, the hotels, the tourist organizations, the Festung Guernsey, the museums, they're all there. So get checking. Use the hashtags Visit Guernsey and Visit Alderney if you're spreading information about this, because the people there absolutely deserve to get more visitors, and you will not get a better welcome from people. And as I say, some of the people normally can be a little bit complacent about tourism, not so on the Channel 9. So that's it. I will love you and leave you. Sorry about my microphone not working at the beginning there. You see it. What happens is there's a button on, see that bit there? That bit there. It flashes green, and if I press it accidentally, it goes red, but I can't see it from the angle. So I must have picked it up and moved it and accidentally touched it and switched off. So well, there you go. That's these things happen. Right. I will see you all tomorrow. Cheers, everybody. Thanks for watching. Bye.